All right. Keeping your vision up. That's the title of the day. And we're going to learn the importance of keeping vision up, maintaining a believing expectation beyond what we see today. Norman Vincent Peale said, quote, "When every physical and mental resource is focused, one's power to solve a problem multiplies tremendously," end of quote. You know, when every mental and physical resource is focused, you know, it allows us to focus on that problem, get the answer to that. And this has been a crazy week, you know, for our country. It's been a crazy week for some of us, for family, work, different physical situations. And that's what brought me to think about this, because it's what we have to focus on what we want, not on what we don't want. And John 4, which will be our text for the day, is a great record that'll help us learn to keep our vision up. And I think you'll really like this. So if you turn to John chapter 4, and in verse 1 it says, "When therefore the Lord knew how the disciples had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, although Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again into Galilee. And he must needs go through Samaria." So if you're in Jerusalem and you want to go to Galilee, you typically have to go through Samaria, which is like the halfway point. It's about 30 miles on a 60-mile trip. And so he cometh to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. So this is an old piece of land. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour, which is about lunchtime. About lunchtime. And so to get from Jerusalem, you know, it was many miles. It might have been more than a one-day walk to get there. And these guys, a lot of times, would just sleep out on the ground. They'd sleep outside. Now you got to imagine that Jesus was wiped out. And the word wearied means he was fatigued by hard work. He was fatigued. He couldn't go any further. And Jesus was a man. He wasn't a spirit. A spirit has consistent energy. 24 hours a day, they can move and work and do. But a man can't. Everybody needs time to recharge. He got tired like all of us get tired. Fighting fatigue. So to understand Jesus' weariness and this mind-numbing fatigue, we got to get a running start on what happened. And I'm going to talk you through his past few weeks here. You don't have to turn there. But he put hundreds of miles on his pedometer up to this point, since he was first baptized by John, his cousin, John the Baptist. Remember, he'd spent 40 days fasting in the wilderness, and he was being tempted of the devil. You know, not to mention having to deal with wild predatory animals that would have stalked him by night. And he was alone. And he was trying out this new toy called Holy Spirit. And he was different now. And for 30 years, he had never done a miracle. He had never received revelation. He had never walked with power. But he dreamed of it. He envisioned himself doing it. He kept this vision his entire childhood and his youth and his early adulthood. And he had only envisioned himself living the Word, living up to God's calling, living up to God's expectation of him. And now it was all coming together. His vision was now a reality. But he was totally exhausted. It just wore him out. A lot of times doing something new is really hard. All the miles and wear that he put on his body also. See, he was trying. Well, Zig Ziglar said, "I don't care how much power, brilliance, or energy you have, if you don't harness it and focus it on a specific target, and hold it there, you're never going to accomplish as much as your ability warrants. Zig Ziglar.
Wow.
I mean, you stay focused and you never let anything get you off target. And that's how you accomplish anything in life. Like I said last week, if you want to make more money, you got to put yourself in a situation where you can. You want more health, you have to put yourself in a situation where you can heal. See, after those 40 days of wilderness training, he walks back to see his cousin, John the Baptist, and stays a couple of days outside near the river. And two of John's disciples, they left John and began to follow Jesus. So his team was beginning to assemble, just sort of organically and naturally. And they were ready to learn, and Jesus was ready to rumble. And Jesus and his growing band of merry men, they started walking maybe 60 plus miles to the hill country of Israel. And this is an area near the town called Nazareth. You might have heard of that town. And it was rough country, sort of like what we see out the window here. If you were going through the foothills of the Rockies, the Front Range here, it'd be rough going. Well, Nazareth would have been a little bit like that. They start gaining altitude, and they're walking through some rugged country. Now, this is all a lead up to this fatigue. That's what I'm trying to show you. It's a lead up. Those 40 days in the wilderness, going to see his cousin, sleeping outside. People begin to follow you 60 miles up to Nazareth into the hill country. And they start, and then they go to the city called Cana in Galilee. And Jesus wanted to attend a wedding with his mom. See, he too had received that Evite. And his mom had not seen him in almost 2 months. And she had never seen him with energized Holy Spirit. She'd never seen him after his 40-day fast. He looked different. His 40-day temptation. What do you learn when you're set in a hard situation and you conquer it? Are you a different person? Mm-hmm. He was different. He looked different. He talked different. Now he had an entourage of people following him who maybe they knew, his mom knew, and maybe she didn't. And these people hung on every word of what her son was saying. It was different. Jesus was different. And at this wedding, he does his first miracle, and he turns water into wine. There was no great healing, no waving of a glowing hand. A miracle doesn't have to be something dramatic, and that's what so many of us think. It was just to bless people. God's even concerned about your party. Think he's not concerned about your health or your wealth? It's there, folks. He's just as concerned. I love that. The first miracle. Just a little bit of wine to make the party a little bit better. You know, a miracle can be just to bless you, just to bless somebody else. You know, Cana is about 10 miles north of Nazareth. And after the wedding, Jesus and the boys now, they gather with his family. They walk another 15 or 20 miles east now to the north side of the Sea of Galilee, and he has a reunion of sorts. His mom, his half-brothers, his disciples, they were all there. Maybe it was a lake house. You know, the little boat tied up to the dock. And they were drowned in worms or something. You know, who knows what they were doing. But this is the new Jesus. And now he had these followers. And what would his family have really thought? You know, they knew he loved God, but this seemed just a little bit out there, a little bit crazy. See, in the same area, now here's, you're going to understand why his parents were hesitant and his family, and why a few months later, a few weeks later, they literally tried to catch him because they thought he was nuts. Here's why. In that same area, not a few years before, a man named Judas of Galilee, he amassed a following of over 2,000 men, mostly Galileans. And their goal was to drive the Romans out of Israel. And the Romans publicly crucified 2,000 of those followers. Right there, right in that area, right near Nazareth, right near Cana. 2,000 of them on the roads, just lines after lines of posts with guys hung to it. And the Romans typically would leave somebody hanging there. The Jews would try to take them down and bury them the next day, but it would only be a family member that would do that. You know, so Jesus' family was concerned. With Jesus' new focus and new followers, they wondered where he was going with this thing. You know, maybe your family thought you were a bit crazy when you first got excited about the Bible, whether you were 17 or 70. So then Jesus had 70 to 80 miles back to Jerusalem from that reunion of sorts to eat Passover in Jerusalem. So the springtime is the time frame. So you got to sort of, now you can envision this. And he walks back up toward, then after that, he walks back up towards Galilee. Now he's going to walk another 60 miles north. I mean, this is a walking fool. So we're going to see why he was so tired and so fatigued. His glycogen stores were spent. You know, and about 30 miles in, he got tired and stopped next to a well-known well. This well of Jacob there, and in an area called Samaria. Samaria wasn't a city. It was a city, but it was also an area. You know, Samaria went all the way from the coast of the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Jordan River. And then it went north maybe 20 miles and down south all the way to almost to Jerusalem. It was a huge area, like a big county. So he's on this trek. He got tired, stopped at this well, and this brings us back to this verse that we just read. And he sat down next to that famous well that had been there over 1,800 years. People have been dipping water from this well for 1,800 years. There's a lot of history there. A lot of people and animals drank out of that thing. He needed a rest, and his men went into town to resupply. He was hungry. They were hungry. Verse 7. And there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. I find it unique that she was the only one, and he was the only one there. Came to draw water. And Jesus saith unto her, Give me a drink. Verse 8. And for his disciples were gone away to the city to buy meat. So they weren't going to walk down in there. You know, Jesus was sitting on the edge of this deep well. And it didn't have a safety guardrail around it like, you know, you would see in today's. It was just a hole in the ground. But it was a big hole in the ground. So he's dangling his feet over this thing. Maybe some cool air is coming up. I don't know. But he's sitting on the well. And the verse 9, Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Don't you know that? She just couldn't, it blew her mind. She was shocked that Jesus would even talk to her, because everyone knew what the Jews thought of the Samaritans. Plus, she was a woman. But Jesus had to learn, he had to turn off her fears, and he had to redirect her concerns. These are things that we need to learn. General George S. Patton once said, quote, The time to take counsel of your fears is before you make an important battle decision. That's the time to listen to every fear you can imagine. When you've collected all the facts and fears and made your decision, turn off your fears and go ahead. End of quote. See, expose your fears. Learn from it. Turn them off and go get what you need. Because it's fear that keeps us staying in one place. It's fear that keeps us stable. Not stable. Keeps us stuck. Thank you. So seeing past prejudice. See, the Jews hated the Samaritans. And years before, the Jews wouldn't even let the Samaritans help rebuild the temple after they broke through Babylonian rule. These guys came with their hard hats on and their little work belts, and they had their pickup trucks, with their names on the sides, and Samaritan builders. And they said, "You guys go back home. We don't even want you guys here. We don't want you helping." They wouldn't even let the Samaritans help them rebuild the temple after it got torn to pieces. Said to go back home. They didn't trust him. And these Samaritans have been hated by their Judean brothers, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a prejudice that most of us can never imagine. You might have been raised at a time of prejudice in our country. It's changed a lot since the 60s and the 50s and such. But, it was hundreds of years of hatred and mistrust. See, about 750 years before Jesus was born, the king of Assyria, he took many of the people that he had conquered from other lands, and he moved them to Samaria in hopes that they would start messing up the genetic population of Israel. And they did. He wanted to mess up their belief system too, because they brought their gods with them. And those were the Samaritans. They were half-breeds genetically. And they were half-breeds in religion. And the Samaritans were different. They looked different. They acted different. And they probably had a different accent too. Yeah, that's why people from Jerusalem and a lot of people in Israel couldn't stand the Samaritans. They were just a little bit pagan and a little bit Hebrew. Today there's some Christian churches that have a mixture of pagan and Christian practices. Do I need to mention any names? Remember Simon the sorcerer of Acts 8? He was teaching and functioning at this time in Samaria. He was there at this time. You see, the record in John's only a few years before Acts 8. And remember, the Bible says that Simon had been bewitching people for a long time. So he was there. He was an off product of the bastardized religions that had sprung up in Samaria. And so calling someone a Samaritan at that time was a big cut, a big slam. And it assumed that you were possessed. If you called somebody a Samaritan, you were saying you are possessed. You have a demon. You have a devil. And like in John 8:48, not long after this record, you don't have to turn there, but it says, Then answered the Jews and said unto him, Jesus, say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil? Well, that's what they said to Jesus' face. They were calling him a Samaritan that was possessed. They called Jesus a possessed, half-breed, mongrel Samaritan. But look how he deals with the Samaritan woman. Does he think of it that way? No. Just amazing, this guy Jesus. How did he live above the prejudice? How did he live above the social standards of men and women? There's so much that can be learned from this record. Verse 10, Jesus answered and said to her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked him, and he would have given thee living water. And the woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. And from whence hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well and drank thereof himself, and his children and his cattle? Now remember, hundreds of years ago, during Jacob's day, that well was a babbling spring. It was a well that flowed onto the ground. And here Jesus is basically testing the waters. No pun intended. This is all about vision. And to say the well is deep is an understatement. The water table in Israel had dropped and is still dropping. And they would carve steps into the limestone walls, and so that they could walk down. In 1869, when people became interested in this, archaeologists, they found that the water was 105 feet below the surface. In 1869. In 1935, it was 135 feet below the surface. That's a long way down. So let's just extrapolate a number and say that it was 50 feet down in Jesus' day. Probably was. About 50 feet, if the calculations hold. And she probably had to walk down those carved circular steps in that well to go down and get water for Jesus. Probably put the pot on her head and walk down into that hole 50 feet. Dipped it, put it back on her head, walked back up those steps, and then gave him something to drink. He may not have had the energy to do it at that point. Probably didn't. Remember, he said his disciples weren't there to do it for him either. Verse 13. Then Jesus answered and said to her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. Now he has a little cup, has a little Sierra cup, or his little tin cup, whatever he had, and he's drinking this, and he goes, Whoever drinks of this water, it's good, but you're going to get thirsty again. He says, But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up unto everlasting life. Now imagine walking into a Walmart, to the beverage aisle, and there's a guy just sitting down on one of the racks. Okay, and you walk by and you say, How you doing, man? He goes, and you expect him to say, Doing all right, thanks. And that was the end of it. Then you pick up your bottled water and go to checkout. But then that same guy, he goes, I see you bought some water there, man. And well, I could give you some water that's so refreshing, you're never going to get thirsty again. It's so good, this water's going to make you live forever. Imagine that happening at Walmart on an empty beverage aisle. Would have been no different than what was happening here. Didn't Ponce de Leon in 1513, didn't he seek the mystical fountain of youth in Florida? Sure he did. Same kind of thing. And so she wasn't sure where he was going. So there had to be something that Jesus said that triggered in her an earnest want, that triggered in her an eager desire. Some switch in her heart was turned on by what he was saying. The same happens when we speak the word to people, the right word at the right time. It's like, wow. He said, this well water is good for you, but eventually you're going to get thirsty again, man. But the water that I give you is not only going to quench your thirst, but it's going to be like a fountain inside of you that never goes away. You think he might have been talking about the unlimited power of Holy Spirit? Oh, yeah. Mind you, he's talking to a Samaritan woman. Samaritan couldn't be any more hated in that society than a Samaritan. Wait till you read some of the things that he's going to teach this woman. And he's spending the day talking to one person. And I was thinking, who gets that? Who gets a full day or a few hours with Jesus Christ? Imagine. It's one-on-one with Jesus. Almost no one on earth has ever had that opportunity. Even the disciples, not all of them got one-on-one time with him. Just amazing. But we each will someday. Verse 15. And the woman said unto him, Sir, give me some of that water, that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. She was taking what he said literally. Well, I'll take some of that water. You wonder if she was like joking. Okay, I'll take some of that water. Because I don't want to have to keep coming back here every day, walking 50 feet down, carrying the thing up, walking back to the city, pouring it for my husband, then in the evening coming back again, walking 50 feet down into that well, carrying it back up, walking back to town every single day. So if you can show me something, I'm all ears, Jesus. Of course, she didn't know who he was. And so she wanted this. And Jesus could tell this woman was hooked now. See, if it was a sales call, Jesus would have turned the contract around facing her and slid it across the shiny wooden table. And he would have set the pen down, uncapped, just at the angle where she could just pick it up and sign next to that little sticky note with the arrow. It's time to sign. Jesus, that's how Jesus saw this conversation. That's how he saw where it was going. George Lucas, the maker of Star Wars, said, you can't do it unless you can imagine it. You can't do it unless you can imagine it. Jesus could imagine this. And this woman was beginning to imagine. Jesus also saw the opportunity to ask for referrals here for you entrepreneurs. And isn't that what every entrepreneur is trained to do? If you don't ask for referrals, do you get them? No. And watch the Spirit of God at work in Jesus. See, God sees what we can scarcely imagine. Verse 16. And Jesus saith unto her, Go call thy husband and come hither. Okay. And the woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, Thou hast well said, I have no husband, for thou hast had 5 husbands. And he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. In that saidst thou truly. What you said's right. You don't have a husband right now, but you had 5 of them. Now, I don't know how old this woman is. I don't know what happened to the other 5 or who this guy is. It doesn't matter. You got to remember, it was different morals in Samaria than in Jerusalem. It's different. What you're dealing with today is different morals than it was 20 years ago. How do you deal with the people? Good example right here. How on earth would Jesus know this information? Anybody have a guess? Think it could be a little revelation? Yeah. Revelation. He'd learn how to use the tools that God gave him. You can learn to use the tools that God gave you. But you got to put yourself out there. Remember, it's keep your vision up. Jesus was teaching her by word and by example. He was teaching this half-breed pagan Jew to walk by the Spirit. And this woman didn't even have the Spirit of God. We do. Get your vision up. God will show you as much as you're willing to see. Get your vision up. Verse 19. And the woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceivest that thou art a prophet. Duh. No, Jesus didn't say that. And verse 20. Our fathers worship in this mountain. Now she has to say something. Okay. Our fathers worship in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship? She assumed Jesus would think like every other religious Judean who passed that way. She just assumed she was going to get attacked here. I mean, if you always did, remember, it was a trade route. People went east and west. It was like a cross roads. Samaria was. Plus the Romans were there. It was a fortified city. I shared that a few weeks ago. So she detected that he was a prophet. She figured that out by what he said, and which is an amazing in and of itself. And most people could care less about spending time with men or women of God. I mean, really, they could care less. You talk the words to a lot of people, and they listen to you for a minute, and then they're looking at their watch. But there's some people who want to hang on to every word. A true teacher teaches to the level of the student's hunger. Verse 21, and Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. So now he's crushing two belief systems here. He said, ye worship, ye know not what, and we know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. Okay, he lays it out there. Now, if this was Hollywood at this point, the musical score would begin to get louder. It would begin to raise and become intense here. And Jesus is telling this woman individually that she would someday see and experience a look into the not so distant future. How cool is that? He was giving her an image of what was going to happen not long from then. A Samaritan. A believing reboot. Jesus reset the vision button for her. And there's so many religions in Samaria, they didn't really know what they believed. It's not much different today. You gather 10 Christians from 10 different churches and ask them, each of them, what they call Christianity. What are you going to get? 10 different answers. Need I say more? It's just one person talking to Jesus here. He'd never met her. She wasn't a friend. She wasn't sent out to meet him. She wasn't a disciple. It was a half-breed, mixed-blood, multi-god worshiping pagan person. A Samaritan. It's amazing. But he knew that she was someone who was raised in a culture of confusing spiritualism with snippets of truth. It's just like you see all the time. He knew he could help her if she wanted help. He knew she was basically clueless, yet he saw sincere hunger for the truth within her. Or else he wouldn't have wasted his time on this one Samaritan. Jesus listened closely, and he answered in detail. It's a good thing if you're talking to somebody to listen. Sometimes we get in such a hurry, all we want to do is talk and say our piece. But listen. To create something exceptional, your mindset must be relentlessly focused on the smallest detail. End of quote. Giorgio Armani. To create something exceptional, your mindset must be relentlessly focused on the smallest detail. That's why that company, Armani, makes millions of dollars. Focus on the detail. If you want to make millions, or thousands, or hundreds, wherever your believing's at, then focus on the details of how to get the job done. Get your vision up. Remember, this whole thing is to get your vision up. He was setting her up for what would someday happen in Samaria. He's setting her up for future success. Get your vision up. Keep your vision up. Expect abundance. You might just get it. See, what happened a few years later in Acts 8 with Philip, Simon, the sorcerer, and the Samaritan people was directly connected to this meeting. Isn't that crazy? It was directly connected to this meeting. See, the word still never comes back void or empty-handed. The Samaritan people were ready to learn, but nobody but Jesus was ready to talk to them. You know, it would take a few years before things really happened with these people. And Jesus is just preparing the canvas like an artist. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "In art, the hand can never execute anything higher than the heart can imagine." End of quote. Timing is everything. Verse 25. And the woman saith unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ, and when he is come, he will tell us all things. See, the woman wanted to say something spiritual back to Jesus. She was fully engaged now. She expected and accepted the Christ. And Jesus saith unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. He said to her, I am the Christ. Now she wasn't expecting that. You know, sort of like, say what? You know, imagine the drama in her heart at that very moment. And now she has to decide if this guy really is the Christ or is it just another crackpot that says he's the Christ. There was a lot of people in Israel at that time who claimed to be the Messiah. It wasn't just Jesus. And maybe she'd heard rumors that the Messiah was alive and walking around in Israel. Probably had. If she lived near Samaria at such a high traffic area, people would have talked about this stuff. John the Baptist, this Jesus guy. But she never would have seen him. They didn't have posters up. She didn't get tweeted a picture of Jesus. I mean, there was no TV, there was no radio, there was no internet. See, people talked about things they had seen and heard from others. And they all wanted to hear what happened outside their city, and word spreads fast in those kind of societies. Think about your family. Think about your own family. You know, something happens at one, it's like, boom! How did you hear about that? You know, they live in another country or something, and they heard. Well, they do. It was like that here. Jesus told her that he was the Messiah, and then he shut up. He let that thought soak in. And that was the seventh and final phrase that he said to that woman. Look them up. Climax, you're believing. And see, that was the climax of the conversation at that point. He had done his job with her. That was as far as he could take this lady, was there. He took her to the limit of her believing, to the limit of her vision and expectation. She wanted to know, and he showed her himself. He elevated her to the point where learning meshes with understanding, the proverbial aha moment, or I get it now. Imagine being that woman. Donald Trump said, one of the keys to thinking big is total focus. I think of it as almost a controlled neurosis, which is a quality I've noticed in many highly successful entrepreneurs. End of quote. A controlled neurosis. Nothing can break you from that focus. See, true learning occurs when you push yourself right to the edge of what you think you can understand, just like Jesus at the edge of that well. And then go a little bit further, and you jump in. That's true learning. See, that's where all the learning and all the blessings and all the benefits come to us from that place. A good teacher recognizes this. This is as far as I could take this lady. Then he just shut up. See, a good parent knows how far to push a child. A good teacher knows how far to push a student. Scene shift. And watch what happens now. This camera lifts from Jesus and this woman, and it takes this woman to a totally new scene. See, so think about the camera shifting now. It was on Jesus, on this lady, on Jesus, on this lady, on 7 times. Boom, 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 boom. Now all of a sudden the camera, Hollywood camera, lifts up, and Verse 27, and upon this came his disciples, and marveled that he talked with the woman. Could they hear what he was saying? No, but they saw it. They were walking up and they could see this dialogue taking place. They could see the animation of Jesus and the interest of this woman leaning forward and closer to Jesus. They marveled. Yet no man said, none of them said, what seekest thou, or why talkest thou with her? They didn't say, what are you doing, Jesus? Why are you talking to this Samaritan lady? She's a devil dog. You know? And so as they were approaching where they'd left, they could see that he'd been talking, but they couldn't hear. Now watch the timing. The disciples with their bag of groceries, they showed up right then. Right at that pregnant pause. Nobody's talking now. They're not talking. You know, they look at Jesus. They look at the woman. You see? They look at Jesus. They look at the woman. They look at Jesus. They look at the woman. They look at each other. Their eyebrows are going up and down. Eyebrows furrowed. You know, they just didn't know what to think about this because it was so outlandish that he was there talking to a Samaritan woman. Talk about taboo. I mean, what is going on here? What just happened? What did we miss? And the woman is blessed out of her mind. She's blessed out of her mind. What just happened? What did we miss? You know, it shows on her face. It colors her body language. It's the excitement of Christmas morning combined with the electricity of finding a brand new love. Now, I'm amazed those guys kept their mouths shut, but I bet their eyes said it all. You know, I mean, what were they thinking? See, Jesus was wiped out an hour or so before, but now he's reinvigorated. He's animated. And they saw him just like a limp rag. And they had to leave him there while they went to town to get some food for him. Isn't that how you know, but now he's excited. Isn't that how we feel when you speak the word to somebody and they respond? It's like, whoa. You might have been tired, but you're not tired anymore. See, nobody's talking. Nobody's saying a word. In a sales close, the first one who speaks loses or buys. Abraham Lincoln said, it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt. You know, during that pause, that uncomfortable, unspoken interchange, the woman left with full intention of returning. So now they show up with their you know, McDonald's bags or whatever they had, and they set these down, and everybody's looking, nobody's saying anything. She gets up in that uncomfortable silence and she walks back to town. You know, she left her water pitcher though, which tells you she was planning on coming back. You know, just like I was at the Albertsons the other day buying something, and a woman, this old gal, she did some shopping, and then she walked away without her 2 bags. And so I just grabbed them and ran up to her and handed them to her. And, oh, thank you, Sonny. Thank you so much. But hardly anybody leaves their bags. You know, you know, it'd be like leaving a shopping cart. You just bought it and then you walk out of the store without your cart. That's how unusual this would be. It almost never happens. And that was her original reason for coming to the well, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. You know, but she got so much more out of that day to quench your thirst. And I was thinking, God will give you, you know, what you need when you're ready to receive. Verse 28, and the woman left her water pot, went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come, see a man which told me all things that I ever did. Is not this the Christ? Then they went out of the city and came unto him. Now she's telling the men of her city, I just talked to the Christ. Now what would most people in town think if this woman came in and said that? You're nuts. You're crazy. You know, there must have been something already going on in Samaria for them to want to see and expect to see something or believe this woman. Had to have been something stirring in that area. And there had to be enough chatter going on in the community for them to think that there had to be some truth to her story. They would not have just taken it at face value. You know, they would have just waved it off. And his words so ignited her inner hunger that she couldn't help but speak. And she grabbed onto Jesus' vision and she jumped. She got her vision up. And we have to keep our vision up. LL Cool J said, and I quote, "Stay focused. Go after your dreams and keep moving towards your goals." End of quote. Actually, you know, I use all these different wacky references because every successful person knows the same thing. You focus on what you want and then you go get it. Don't let anything stop you from getting what you want. Is it healing? Is it money? Is it fame? You know, is it a hobby? What is it? Don't let anything stop you from getting what you want. Manja. The disciples had to play it cool and wait for Jesus to speak first and tell them what happened. And they were acting like nothing happened, like a normal day. So they just opened the little bags of food and whatever. And verse 31, in the meanwhile his disciples prayed him, saying, "Master, eat." Now they didn't ask him what went on, what just happened. They just said unto him, "Eat." And he said unto them, "I have a meat to eat that ye know not of." You know, I just ate a meal that you have no idea of. See, they slapped a sandwich in his hand. New Jersey for sandwich. And then they go, "Manja, manja. Come on, Jesus, eat of the food. You're looking a little skinny there. And then, come on, you got to eat something, Jesus." And Jesus said, "Man, I just ate a meal that was so good, it'll blow your freaking mind." Verse 33, and therefore said the disciples one to another, "Hath any man brought him to eat?" Now I love how they're still not asking Jesus what he was talking about. They're asking, "Hey, Peter, what's he talking about?" You know, they're asking each other. They still don't get it. And, you know, he's setting them up for a learning breakthrough. This long-range vision of a true minister or a good parent. You know, it's the same vision that we need to have. It's got to be high. And it's got to be higher than we're thinking now, or we'll stay exactly where we are right now. Or go backwards. I guess you never stay the same. Here's a Chinese warrior from 500 BC, Sun Tzu. Quote, "Can you imagine what I would do if I could do all I can?" See, Jesus tells them that his life is only satisfied when he does what God called him to do. And the same is true with us. How much more can we do? If you could do all that you could do, like Sun Tzu said, you know, what would you do if you did all that you could? Like the Bible says, we can do all things through Christ. How big is that? You know, if you don't know what it is, we need to just start learning and studying and speaking the word and giving, finding our place in the body. That's the whole purpose of this True North ministry. Not for me to tell you who you are or what you're supposed to do. It's for me to just expose you to a little bit of truth and you decide what you want to do, how far you want to go. We're just pointing people in the direction. You know, Jesus is like magnetic north. We might just be that needle. Just point the direction. Every man's got to decide on his own. Verse 35. Keep your vision up. We're going to get the pinnacle of this teaching now. And it says, Say not ye, there are 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. And he's wiping that pastrami off. You know, he just wipes his mouth off with his little napkin from the bag. You know, whatever he was eating, some meatball sandwich. You know, whatever Jesus ate. You know, I don't know. And and they're all sitting around and not saying much. And then he looks up and he sees something. He goes, you say it's 4 months till harvest. Like someday you're gonna reach your goals. He said, I'm telling you, it's happening right now. Look up. And then the camera pans up, and you see all these people walking down these roads. All these men, and that same woman who was there, and they're heading this way. He says, lift up your eyes, because they're white already to harvest. See, your harvest may come a different way than you think. You still got to think and head a direction, but it may come a different way than you think. Your healing may come a different way than you think. You think, oh, it's got to be a miraculous healing. No, it doesn't. Every healing's miraculous. Oh, I got to earn money this way. No, you don't. Put yourself in a situation where you can earn more money if you want to earn more money. Put your situation where you can have better health if you want more health. How does it pertain to us? You know, stop saying that someday my ship will come in, or someday I'll have this or that, or someday I'll finally be healed, or someday maybe I'll do what God wants me to do after I get my finances together, or whatever your excuse is. See, the time is now, folks. The time is now. Be the person God wants you to be now. It's the only way you're ever going to truly be happy. You know, I don't care what kind of background or what kind of mixed up situations you came out of, what kind of mongrel situation you might have been raised in. It doesn't matter. It's all about the Spirit of God and learning to use the tools that God gave us. Assemble with your team. People who think like you do. You know, move with people who are heading in the same direction. Your harvest is now. Someday is now. See, some see just rolling hills of immature crops. You know, Jesus says, I already see the harvest. It's already in. It's already happened. Money's in the bank. And that's the attitude of a winner. You already have it. The harvest is already there. You've already been given your healing. You've already been supplied all your needs. Everything you'll ever need has already been supplied. Keep your vision up. See, God's had years and years and years to supply your need. And many people have done their part to help you get what you need now. Isn't that something? I know next week Tom's going to talk about the separatists. And they wanted to come to this country to make a better life and to preach the word and all this, and they ended up with just a bunch of Indians, you know, up in off Cape Cod and each other. But look at the example that they set. Looking forward to hearing that next week. You know, thousands of people over thousands of years have done their part so that you can have your need met right now. It's already there, folks. Get your vision up and get your deliverance. Many Samaritan men went out to the well with that woman to see what she talked about. They too had caught the vision. Many believed in Jesus Christ that day. They begged Jesus to stay with them, and he spent 2 full days with these Samaritans. Who else got that but the disciples? I don't know where that ever happened in the Gospels. 2 full days he spent with those men and that woman. How crazy of a time must that have been? What would you have given to have been there? You know, Zig Ziglar says lack of direction, not lack of time, is the problem. We all have 24-hour days. See, these half-breed outcasts got individualized attention from the Christ. They were ready to receive. And Acts proved they kept their vision up for a few years. They expected it. When Philip came into that city and preached, everybody turned on. They were waiting. Jesus lit the fuse. The Spirit of God caused things to just blow up a few years later. So the parable of the Good Samaritan was given not long after this interchange, these 2 days. No matter where society places you, keep your believing and vision up. You're better than you think you are. No matter what's going on, you can press the reset button of your believing at any time. You can reboot your believing at will. Keep your believing up. Your fields are ripe and your harvest is ready. So keep your vision high and your believing keep steady. Keep your vision up. God bless.